Welcome to Filmability. My name is Joel Fisher and I'm the author of Filmability, A History of Disability in Cinema, which you can find on Amazon and Kindle paperback. Welcome if this is your first time listening, and welcome back if you've listened before. Remember, you can find me wherever you get your podcasts, so remember to like, share, subscribe, comment and all that good stuff. This week I'll be talking about Unbreakable, M. Night Shyamalan's unique take on a comic book film that's about a man with osteogenesis imperfecta who thinks he's found the most invulnerable man in the world. As usual, I would suggest that you go and watch Unbreakable before listening to the rest of the podcast, because I'll be going through everything and spoiling it all. If you'd like to watch it, then you can find it on Disney Plus and in physical and digital forms. So without further ado, let's get on with the film. The film opens with a card that says there were 35 pages and 124 illustrations in the average comic book. A single issue ranges in price from $1 to over $140,000. 172,000 comics are sold in the US every day, and over 62,780,000 sold each year. The average comic book collector owns 3,312 comics and will spend approximately 1 year of his or her life reading them. I mean, this film was made in 2000, so maybe those statistics have changed, but I will look into how accurate they were in the first place. The next scene, you see a baby crying, and a woman is in a department store, and it's Philadelphia in 1961. The doctor comes in and he asks the woman the baby's name. She says his name is Elijah, and he takes him from her. He asks her about the birth, and he's told that it's a quick birth and very easy. He says to call an ambulance because there had been a situation though. He tells the mother that her baby's arms and legs are broken, and she bursts into tears. The mother is played by Charlemagne Woodard. In the present day, we see a man on a train, and this is David, and he's played by Bruce Willis. He sees a little boy messing around and he makes faces at him. A woman then comes to sit next to him and asks if he's sitting alone. She sits down and he offers her a magazine to read. He tells her he's afraid of water as well. They're sort of getting to know each other. She tells him that she's a sports agent, and he's flirting a little, and she tells him that she's married. It's a bit of an awkward moment. She's getting wrong into the stick, but then she gets up and moves, and David awkwardly touches his own wedding ring, and then he tries to get some sleep by putting his head on the window and trying to close his eyes and relax. He stares out the window though, and the train starts to feel unstable, shaking a little bit more than it was before. In a house, there's a kid who's watching TV. He's sitting upside down on the couch. He's flicking through the channels and he finds a news report about a train that's crashed. He realises that it was a train that his dad was on. And this boy is called Joseph, and he's played by Spencer Treat Clark. In the hospital, David sits on a gurney and a doctor introduces himself, telling him that he was in a serious accident. He starts asking David some medical questions and asks whether he was on the train. David then asks about other passengers, and the doctor asks him if he was travelling with his family, and he says that he wasn't. The doctor then asks more questions, but David wants to know why he's being treated so weirdly. It's like he's asking very strange questions that you wouldn't normally ask a patient. The doctor says he's curious because David was the only survivor of the crash and he didn't even break a bone. David then goes outside in the corridor and meets his son and his wife, played by Robin Wright, and her name is Audrey. They leave as the photographers from the press are taking pictures of him. At home, Audrey asks him about what happened, and David says he didn't think he got the job, and he goes upstairs. It's clear he doesn't want to talk about the crane crash, but he's also worried about how he was the only survivor. As a memorial service for those lost in the crash, the priest at the front reads out all the names of the people who died. David then goes back to his car and finds an envelope on the windshield. He opens it, and inside the note says, "How many days of your life have you been sick?" He looks around trying to see who could have left it there. And at work, it turns out that David is a security guard. And he goes into an office and there's a woman typing there, and he asks her to pass on a message to his boss, asking him how many sick days he's taken. I'm not sure why David wouldn't know this, but never mind. Outside, David's at a football practice. It's raining really hard and he's wearing a sort of anorak thing. It covers his head and it covers his body, and he looks like a sort of cloaked figure looking out into the football practice, and there's something about the way he's looking at them, perhaps wishing he was there himself. At work, David's boss comes in and he goes, "Okay, you're going to get a $40 raise," because he had a look at how many sick days David's taken, and he hasn't taken any. At home, David asks Audrey if she remembers the last time he was sick. She says she doesn't know and he can't remember. He questions it, thinking it's weird, and he asks her what she thinks it means. She says it's probably because she's too tired to remember. And again, this whole aspect doesn't really sit well with me, because you would remember being ill, and you would remember if you weren't ill. it's sort of, I mean, I can think about, years ago, there was like 3 days where I was wiped out. I felt awful, but by the 4th day I was absolutely fine. I remember that stuff, but the fact that David hasn't really even thought about why he's never been sick, it just doesn't seem to ring true for me in the story. In West Philadelphia, 1971, it's very hard for me to not go into the Fresh Prince about their theme tune by saying West Philadelphia. But anyway, in West Philadelphia, 1971, Elijah is sitting in front of a TV that's not turned on, and he has his arm in a sling. His mum comes in and tells him that he can't stop doing things in case he breaks anything, because he'll always be afraid of everything if he does that. She tells him that she's got a present for him, but she's left it on a park bench across the road. He says he thinks somebody will take it, and she says, well, he'd better get out there quickly. Outside, he opens the present, and it's a comic book. His mother sits next to him, and she says that she's brought a lot of them for him, and she'll leave it for him on the park bench for whenever he wants to go out. In the present day, Elijah, played by Samuel Jackson, is talking about a piece of concept art for a comic book. The man he's selling it to decides to buy it, and says that his son will love it, saying that he's only 4 years old. Elijah gets angry and says that he's been wasting his time, and he says that he's selling art, not comic book panels. David arrives later on and is with Joseph, and he says that the card was from Elijah's gallery, and that they talk about what it said on the card. Elijah asks if he was ever been injured, and David said he was in a car crash when he was younger. Elijah then talks about comic books, saying that he believes that they are a link to communication throughout the ages, such as hieroglyphics and cave paintings. He says he heard about the train crash, and he tells them about his disability, and it's osteogenesis imperfecta, which I will talk a little more about later. He says that he's been looking for somebody indestructible because his own disability makes him feel so breakable. And this is the thing. Elijah is shown as a child feeling like an outcast and afraid to go out in the world because of his disability. His mother encourages him to go out, but he has seemingly decided to ignore the lesson in favour of an obsession about comic books. Trying to find the most invulnerable person in the world has led him down a dark path, and so his entire life has been about his disability, focusing on what he can't do, and how much better his life would be if he knew that somebody was his complete opposite. However, what this does is only emphasise for a non-disabled audience that his line of thinking was a natural progression, assuming that his life is so hard because he's disabled. You see it in stories like Peter Pan, every other James Bond film, and Star Wars, although, to be generous, the latter did at least add a little context to his reasoning behind his actions in the prequels. But in most cases, a disabled villain sees his disability as a curse, and his single-mindedness means that he can't see the wood for the trees, and it becomes two-dimensional. Equating this with real disability, although perhaps not all disabled people may seriously think of disabled people as villains, the connections are there, and jokes about wheelchair users scheming evil plots to take over the world only diminish disabled people to what the non-disabled people see on screen. David tells Joseph not to drink the water because he's starting to have an uneasy feeling about Elijah. I mean, Samuel Jackson does play it very well. He's very creepy in this, but it's a quick judgment from David and something that will pay off later. Joseph objects though, but David tells him to throw it away. So he leaves, and David tells Elijah that he thinks he's trying to scam him. Elijah then asks what he does for a living, and as he leaves, David tells him he's a security guard at the football stadium. At home, David sneaks out of bed while Audrey is asleep, and he goes to his closet to find a file full of newspaper clippings about his football career and the car crash that ended it. He then sees the article about the train crash in which he was the only survivor, and in his mind he's making a link between what happened in both of the crashes. Audrey then comes in to see him, and she asks him if he can give their relationship a second chance. And she wants it to be like when they first met. It feels like there's something going on between them. Maybe it happened before the crash or since the crash. It's not really clear. And although David probably does want to reconcile with his wife, he closes the door as she leaves. At the stadium, David is told over the radio that somebody has a bogus ticket and says that he knows David. He goes to see who it was, and of course it was Elijah. And he asks David about why he chose to do security as a job. They go to the front of the line, and David points out somebody in the line who he thinks has a weapon, saying that things happen sometimes if people drink too much. Inside the stadium, Elijah asks David how he knew that the man had a weapon, and David says he just knew, and Elijah says he thinks David has a good instinct, and that he may have some superpowers. Over the radio, David is told that the man that he pointed out earlier did indeed have a gun. Elijah then asks if anybody else was involved in the car crash, and David said that his wife was involved, and Elijah leaves. In the car park, Elijah sees somebody and goes after them as fast as he can, considering he's using a cane. He follows into a large flight of stairs, and then Elijah goes down them. But he's struggling a bit because he's using a cane, and I'd imagine he's never really been on that kind of flight of stairs before because of his disability. And he loses his grip, and he slips, and he falls, breaking bones. And as he lays there, he sees a flash of the gun that was in the man's trousers. And this is something among the various other misconceptions about Elijah's disability that the film gets very, very wrong. No matter who you are, if you are disabled, then you know that there are things that you are not able to do, and that there are things that you shouldn't attempt. I myself, as a wheelchair user, know that if I were to attempt to go down a series of stairs by myself without any aid, then I would be in serious trouble. I've been down a hill or two by myself and lived to tell the tale, but that is for another podcast. In reality, Elijah would never attempt such a thing because of his condition that is commonly known as brittle bone disease. He knows that no matter how brave he is, that attempting to go down a flight of stairs with only the aid of his cane could lead to serious trouble and maybe even death. The fact that he gets out of it with barely a broken leg, despite what the doctor tells him, is a miracle, or more likely a screenwriter who heard about a rare disability and decided that it would make a good plot device. Although it's implied that Elijah may have known about Audrey working at the hospital, it's an extremely dangerous risk to put himself in danger in order to get close to her. For all he knew, she could have worked somewhere else entirely, and the audience had never told this, making their meetings seem like a huge coincidence. Elijah doesn't even represent a realistic portrayal of orthogenesis imperfecta, as a short stature often comes along with it due to stunted bone growth. Not to mention Elijah should have been a wheelchair user from the start, so it just comes across as, I guess, another badly thought out portrayal of a disabled character. Joseph is playing football across the street in the park, and David comes to see him, saying his mother would be mad if she knew that he was playing football. He explains how he looks up to one of the kids though, and as they talk they end up going home. David lifting weights. He says to Joseph that that's the most he's ever lifted and it's felt easy. He asks Joseph to take the weights off, and Joseph asks him if he could beat up Bruce Lee, because he feels like his dad is a superhero. He's fully buying into it. And he asks if he could beat up Bruce Lee, even if Bruce Lee wasn't allowed to kick and his dad was really angry. David says that he couldn't, and Joseph leaves him to continue lifting weights. And as he continues, Joseph said that he didn't need to take any of the weights off, like he was asked to do, and instead he suggests that they add more. So they do add more, and David assures him that it's dangerous and says to get Audrey if something goes wrong. However, David keeps lifting the weights, and it does look like he's asserting some kind of effort into it. And then David asks his son how much he put on, and Joseph said that he used all the weights that they have. So David says that they should try and put more on. And the last shot you see is the weights with a couple of paint buckets put on the ends of them. At the hospital, a doctor is going through Elijah's injuries, and Elijah's lying there. He's defeated, he's broken, he's reminded of his disability basically, and he talks about how people used to call him Mr. Glass because of his easily breakable bones, and the doctor just sort of ignores him and continues listing his injuries. In the hospital reception, Audrey turns out to be a physiotherapist, and Elijah is her next patient. He's sitting in a wheelchair now, and he has his leg in a brace. It's sort of got pins on it. It looks like he's seriously hurt himself. Not to the extent that somebody with osteogenesis imperfecta would have hurt themselves if they had fallen down a flight of stairs like that, but again, I will talk about that later. He asks her about her life, and she says that she doesn't like football because it's violent, it leads to injuries, and it's pretty much the opposite of what she does. And she says that her husband doesn't play anymore because that she doesn't like it. Elijah then asks what part of David was injured, but Audrey hasn't said David's name, so she wonders how Elijah knows him. Outside the stadium, David is watching the crowd, and he stands in the middle, letting them pass by, until he feels a woman brush past him, and it's implied that there is some trouble there. It's like when he can touch somebody, that he can feel the anguish that they're going through. At the hospital, Elijah says that he talked to David about his car crash, and believes him to be invincible, saying that he hopes that she can keep an open mind. Although, I think maybe at this point Audrey is feeling the uneasiness about Elijah that David was feeling before. At the stadium, David asks a man to open his pockets, saying that there have been reports of people selling drugs. He puts his arms up as David pats him down and asks if he can go. David says he can, but he's still keeping an eye on him. And this is a director cameo by M. Night Shyamalan, who tends to do that in all of his movies. At school, Joseph and another boy are sitting outside the principal's office. It seems that they've been in a fight, and the other boy says that he could beat up his dad easily. Little did he know. Inside the office, David's asking about his life while he was there, because this teacher is quite old, and he doesn't really remember her, but she knows things about him and talks to him about a boy that was nearly drowned in 4 inches of water. Something that will definitely come up later. Outside, Joseph is talking about his dad's superhero code of not hurting anybody like other superheroes like Batman, Superman, and things like that. He thought he could be just like his dad, and that's why he got into a fight. He thought he would be invulnerable too. David assures him that they're both normal though, but Joseph doesn't understand because he's starting to see that his dad is anything but normal. At home, David and Audrey are talking, and Joseph comes in, putting a gun on a kitchen counter which startles them both. He says he's going to prove that David is invincible by shooting him, and he aims a gun at him. But David says that he had been talking to the principal, and the boy that had nearly drowned in such a little amount of water was him. He's not invulnerable. But then David starts shouting at Joseph, and eventually David gets the gun off of him. And then they all slide to the floor, and it's a sort of shocking moment, but it's all been diffused. At the gallery, Elijah is going on about David being invincible, and David said he's had enough and he wants him to leave his family alone. It seems that through one way or another, Elijah has got to all of them in his own way. In a comic book store though, later on, there's a man who's working there behind the counter, and he can hear something going on. So he shouts and hopes that they're not up to any trouble. And he goes back to see who it is, and Elijah is sitting there in his chair. Devon apologises though, he didn't think that Elijah was in a wheelchair. At David's place, Joseph is playing with superhero figures, and his mum asks him if he's okay, and he says he is, and David suggests to Audrey that they go out for a couple of drinks. In the comic book store, the person working there goes and gets Elijah and takes hold of his chair and starts to wheel him out the shop, but it seems that Elijah is guiding the chair. He's using his leg to knock things off the display, and he's doing it on purpose. And the man who works at the shop says that he's had enough and is going to call the police. But as a comic book falls onto Elijah's lap, he asks how much it is. At a restaurant, David and Audrey are talking, and she asks him about the accident, asking why David's been keeping her and Joseph at a distance ever since. She says that she thinks he has a gift. Whether it is superpowers or not, he can do something for good with what he has. They get home, and there's a babysitter there for Joseph, and she talks about the messages they got, and one of them was from a security firm asking about hiring David. She leaves, and Audrey congratulates David on the new job, although she knows how much it will change their lives. And again, it feels like their relationship is still a bit on the rocks, but it may change. At home, a babysitter is talking about the phone calls that they've got, including a call from a security firm that's wanting to hire David. The babysitter leaves, and Audrey congratulates David on the job, although she knows how much their lives will change. It seems that despite the fact that they've gone out to a restaurant and they've tried to be talking about their lives and their relationship, things haven't really changed that much. David then checks his answer machine, and he has a quick message from Elijah saying that he's read the comic book, saying that he believes that they are two sides of the same coin, saying that he knows that the water is David's real weakness. In the next scene, it's raining really hard, and David breaks into a warehouse. It goes to a flashback where David is trying to save somebody from the burning car wreck. It's his wife that he was alluding to earlier. A man arrives and asks what happened. David says his wife's leg is broken, but then the man asks him if he was hurt, and David doesn't know what to say. In the present day, David calls Elijah, saying he finally believes him, and Elijah reassures him that it's going to be okay because this is real life, not a comic book. David's at a train station. He's feeling people pass him, and in particular a woman who has stolen from a jewellery shop. He then feels another man pass him by, and he gets a vision of him taking advantage of a woman who's been drugged. And then somebody else passes by, and he gets a flash of a man coming to see somebody's house, saying that he likes the house and he wants to come in. And the next thing you see is that the owner of the house is dead. And we go back to David, who's concerned by all the things he's seen, and he follows the man who he's seen kill somebody in his mind. And he goes to the house, and he finds a woman and her daughter tied up in the basement, and he unties them. He goes outside, but is then confronted by the killer, and he throws him over the balcony into what seems to be a large pool of water. And I think it's a sort of swimming pool, it's not really clear, but it's covered over with black plastic covering, which then surrounds itself around David, and it makes it impossible for David to move. But he does struggle, and eventually he gets out of the water. The mother and daughter are then standing there in the rain, and David follows the killer back to where he's going, and he finds a woman tied up in the basement, which on reflection must be the mother of the two women that were in the scene before. And he unties the woman, going home to find Audrey sleeping on the couch. So he takes her in his arms and he takes her up to bed, hugging her, saying that it was all a bad dream. Joseph then comes downstairs the next morning, and Audrey and David are talking. It's a nice family breakfast thing, as if nothing had ever happened. Joseph's looking cautiously at them though, because he can't quite understand how they're behaving like this. He doesn't know anything about what happened the night before, but it seems unusual for them anyway. Audrey says that there's been a bad man in the neighbourhood, and if they ever hear about anything like that, then they should call the police immediately. And Joseph agrees and looks at his dad, and then looks at a newspaper article about a hooded hero, and there's a big drawing of a heroic hooded mystery figure, and he puts it together that it was his dad. At the gallery, David is looking around and he meets Elijah's mother. She says she's very proud of him and of what Elijah has achieved. And it's a bit of a shame because they could have cast somebody a bit older, but they just went with the actress that they had originally and put her in a wig. It's not very good, but it's very brief. I just feel like they could have done a bit better somehow. David then goes down to the basement to see Elijah, and he shows him the newspaper and says that it has begun. David's superhero career is only starting now. And then Elijah holds out his hand to shake. And as David shakes Elijah's hand, he sees Elijah's life. He sees them at an airport just before a plane crashes, and he sees him going into the train that David was on, stepping out of it as a man tells him that he shouldn't have been in there. David is panicked. He looks around the room and realises that Elijah had caused the crash. Elijah says that he made many sacrifices to find him. He says that he knows who he is because he knows who David is. He says they're complete opposites, like comic book villains and heroes are in the books. And as many superhero villains often do, he asserts himself by saying that he should be called Mr. Glass, like he was talking about in the hospital before. And then the text comes up saying Elijah Price is now in an institute for the criminally insane. And that's the end of the movie. Up next, I'm going to talk about what I think about the film overall and what I think about how it would come across for an undisabled audience. Unbreakable is indeed a unique take on a comic book story. Stripping away all the brightly coloured spandex and the flashy special effects, Unbreakable boils its story down to the bare essentials, and both Bruce Willis and Samuel L. Jackson play their parts extremely well, with the former showing what he can do in a rare dramatic role outside of his action movies. However, reducing the roles of hero and villain to their most basic archetypes raises some issues, and it's not because it highlights the superhero and action movie trope of using disabled villains. Taking at best value, it seems that writer-director M. Night Shyamalan may just be outright saying to the audience that disabled people cannot be trusted. Elijah's entire character revolves around his disability in his obsession, which started when he was a child, and the audience knows nothing else about him. So when he reveals his master plan and connects it to his own disability, it shows the audience that his disability was the catalyst for his evil-minded personality. In real life, there is a certain distrust of disabled people because of the lack of education about disability. On top of that, there are misconceptions that disabled people are lazy and just out for themselves, waiting for a handout rather than contributing to society. Hand in hand with the disabled villain trope, this only exaggerates the idea that the disabled people are mysterious, strange, and untrustworthy. And up next, I'm going to be talking a little bit about osteogenesis imperfecta and the realities behind the condition. Osteogenesis imperfecta, otherwise known as brittle bone disease, is a group of genetic disorders that result in bones that break easily. Symptoms differ in the skeleton and organs and range from mild to severe. Symptoms such as the whites of the eyes being blue, a short stature, loose joints, hearing and breathing problems, as well as problems with the teeth called dentigenesis imperfecta, are all common with the condition. Needless to say, a lot of these symptoms are life-threatening and are more common in more severe cases. Osteogenesis imperfecta has also been found to be hereditary in some cases and just spontaneously occurring in others. There are 4 clinically defined types, with type 2 being lethal before a child is even born. However, many adults can live their lives with a significant degree of autonomy, and there is no major effect on life expectancy in most cases. A healthy lifestyle and diet with plenty of vitamin D and calcium, along with exercise, can also maintain the body and help prevent fractures. The condition has been described since ancient history, and the Latin term osteogenesis imperfecta was coined by Dutch anatomist Willem Rollet in 1849. Translated literally, it means imperfect bone formation. On the other hand, where Samuel L. Jackson's character could have been looking for somebody who was the complete opposite of him, he should have been perhaps looking for somebody with osteopetrosis, otherwise known as marble bone disease or Albers-Schoenberg disease, which is an extremely rare inherited disorder where the bones become hard and dense. It was first described in 1993 by German radiologist Albert Schoenberg. And up next, I'm going to be talking about the trivia for the film. Okay, on to trivia. Firstly, writer M. Night Shyamalan always had Bruce Willis and Samuel L. Jackson in mind to play the roles of David Dunn and Elijah Price. The glass cane that Elijah Price uses was also Samuel L. Jackson's idea. The film is shot as a series of long, very long by Hollywood standards, tracking shots, often with stark shadows or unusual camera angles to mimic the storyboard flow of a comic book. Of all the films he made, this is apparently M. Night Shyamalan's favourite one. And it's also one of Quentin Tarantino's favourite films. At a budget of $75 million, the film cost almost 3 times more money to make than both the sequels, Split and Glass combined. And it was entirely shot in sequence. M. Night Shyamalan came up with the idea for the movie while filming The Sixth Sense, which also starred Bruce Willis. Shailene Woodard, who plays the mother to Samuel Jackson's character, is actually almost a full 5 years younger than her on-screen son, which is fine when he's a little kid, but when he's an adult, although you don't really see Samuel Jackson and her in the same scene, it's very obvious, like I said, that it's just her in a grey wig, and it doesn't really work for me. The name Elijah is a biblical reference. Elijah was prophesied to return to earth to pave the way for the coming of the son of David, a saviour. Joseph is also a biblical name, and was also the descendant of David. The film derived from the first third of the original script, and that Shyamalan felt no connection to the last 2/3 of the text, and decided to discard them. The first comic book that Elijah receives is an issue of Active Comics. The logo is deliberately reminiscent of the original logo of Action Comics, the series that introduced Superman. This marks the fourth film to feature Bruce Willis and Samuel Jackson. The others were Loaded Weapon 1, Pulp Fiction, and Die Hard with a Vengeance. M. Night Shyamalan said that the studio wanted to market this movie as a horror thriller rather than a superhero movie. They were like, we had one of the biggest movies of all time, The Sixth Sense, and the same two people were making another movie. Let's make it look like that movie, as opposed to what it was, which was the beginning of the entire genre. They didn't realise it was because they were too scared to say the words comic book. That was literally the thing that was like, no one will get to see a movie about comic book. In a 2020 interview, Spencer Treat Clark revealed that a crew member had to leave the set after the filming of the kitchen gun scene because he was so disturbed by it. And quite frankly, I'm not surprised, it's quite an intense scene. Julianne Moore was offered the part of Audrey Dunn, but turned it down to work on Hannibal, which is a film I will probably get back to another time. Feature film debut of Laura Reagan as a young Audrey. Reagan recalls walking into the audition room not knowing who M. Night Shyamalan was, despite the fact that the poster for The Sixth Sense was in the room. She said that if she had known who he was, she probably would have gotten too nervous and bombed the audition. Elijah drives a Checker Marathon, a brand that ceased production in 1982 and for decades was the standard Checker taxi cab. It was famous for being extremely reliable, solidly built, safe and roomy, and was specifically designed to be the ideal taxi. So you can see that maybe if they're saying about Elijah's osteogenesis imperfecta, that he would travel in a car that was unbreakable as such. Another flashback to Elijah Bryce's childhood was shot, in which the boy escapes from his mother's watch at a fair and steps into a dark cyclone spinning ride, causing him to sustain a broken arm. Director M. Night Shyamalan called it the most action-packed scene in the film, but deleted it from the final print, as he felt it was out of place for the rest of the movie. He regretted having to do it, praising the performance of Johnny Hiram Jameson and his patience in reshooting the scene several times, but fortunately most of the scenes were later reused as a flashback in glass. When Joseph is playing football with his friends and mentions to his father that they are playing with Potter's cousin, who is a starting cornerback at Temple University, this is the exact same player that the sports agent told David about when he was on the train earlier on. This is why David knowingly responds to his son, "I've heard," when he tells him about all the statistics about Potter's cousin. David Dunn's superhuman attributes are similar to Marvel Comics superhero Luke Cage. They both have bulletproof skin, super strength, enhanced endurance, and a healing factor, but both can be drowned, gassed, or suffocated. Robin Wright and Michael Kelly, who appears briefly as a doctor in the ER, would go on to have leading roles in House of Cards in 2013. Unbreakable was featured in the A to Z of superhero movies, from A-Bar to Zar via the MCU, written by Rob Hill, which I've also read, and I've, in another life, interviewed the author, and I thoroughly recommend it. And finally, the author of the newspaper article about David saving the children is by Nicole Marcella, who worked in the art department of the film. Okay, that's it for me this week. Next week I'll be talking about Split, a horror film about a man who's got dissociative identity disorder, who kidnaps a girl, and there seems to be something deeper lurking inside him. If you'd like to contact me, you can do so via Bluesky at bluesky.com/film-ability. You can also email me at film-ability@outlook.com. And if you'd like to make a contribution to the things that I do here, you can find me at Patreon at patreon.com/film-ability. You can also find my book at Amazon on Kindle and paperback called Filmability, A History of Disability in Cinema. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.